vacation.
I saw that.
Jim was on vacation.
I saw him at the Oaks,
Yeah.
He's staying his mom.
he was his mom, yeah, so he was going in,
The button popped there.
wearing his cut up down.
Well, I came in for.
It's not showing the camera, but yeah.
The time where.
Didn't want anybody on this side.
Lady at the no frills goes, you're not working, will you?
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, July 24th. Hard to believe it's July 24th, but here we are. We'll start as we always do with playing the national anthem. So if you're able, I would ask that you stand and join us. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. These traditional territories upon which we live, work, play, and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions, and it is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. And we encourage residents to review the call to action information, which can be found by visiting website, the link of which can be found on our town's website. Standard reminder to members to declare any pecuniary interest that they may have with respect to any agenda item tonight. Don't see any at this time. If anything arises throughout the meeting, you can declare it at that point. Minutes from our meeting of July 10th. Can I have a mover and seconder to adopt those minutes as circulated? Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Sample. Any items for discussion there? Okay, all in favor? That's carried. All right, next up is our public participation section. We do have some presentations, but before we get there, public question period. Are there any questions from the public? Is anything submitted by email? Okay. All right, so the first presentation we have this evening is from Watson and Associates to review our water and wastewater rate study. And I believe we're joined by Peter, is it Simcisco? Okay. Welcome, Peter.
Good evening, everyone. We'll start on slide one, the title slide. The town has retained the services of our firm Watson and Associates to undertake a water and wastewater rate study. We had previously undertaken a comprehensive water wastewater rate study for the town back in 2017 or 2018. And municipalities do typically update these types of studies about every 5 years. So it was time to look at this again. We do have a work plan that consists of various key tasks as part of the process, including forecast the water and water service demands, Looking at the capital needs as well as the forecast of those capital needs. Looking at capital cost financing options as part of the assessment. Looking at operating costs as well, looking at how we expect those to evolve over the forecast period. And then undertaking detailed rate calculations and analysis around all of that as well. The work plan also includes preparation of a water financial plan, which is required under regulation 45307 and is one of the requirements for municipalities to, as part of their license renewal for their drinking water systems. So this rate study will result in an updated water financial plan as well. And as part of this process, we are going to be preparing a formal report at the conclusion and wanted to engage with council as part of the process as well. In terms of the presentation this evening, there are really two things we like to focus on. One is the overall methodology that we employ in undertaking a water wastewater rate study. And then we'll focus in a little bit narrowly on the work that we have already completed, looking at the current customer profile, looking at consumption patterns that we are seeing within that customer base that the town has. And then looking at that in light of the rate structure that's currently in place to recover the costs of these water wastewater services. And then potentially we're discussing some potential alternatives to that current rate structure that we would like to propose looking into as part of the assessment as well. So if we could go to slide 2, please. That's where we have a illustration of the overall methodology that's used in determining the full cost recovery water and wastewater rate forecast. We start typically with looking at the growth forecast to the top left of the illustration. And that's both in terms of the number of new customers that might connect systems in the future as a result of developments that continues to occur within the town, but then also looking at the volume of consumption associated with those customers as well. Now, with that additional growth, there may also be the need for infrastructure upgrades or expansion, and so the growth forecast way also informs any capital works requirements to some extent as well. And then we have the other capital needs arising potentially from legislative changes that may require updates to treatment or monitoring processes, for example, dealing with localized issues with infrastructure and just general asset management planning matters as well. These capital work requirements are then translated into a 10-year capital forecast. Typically within the rate study context, we are looking at a 10-year forecast for both the expenditures and then the rates required to support those expenditures. Relative to that capital forecast, we are then also looking at various financing options, such as connection fees or development charges, which are very common for the growth-related components, and then utilizing debt to mitigate any large rate spikes that we might be faced with, financing bigger expenditures over a longer term, and also utilizing reserves and reserve funds to the extent possible. As a result of any financing decisions that are made either in the future or that have been made in the past, we might be looking at some capital related expenditures such as the payments of debt that exists that's associated with previous capital works that are completed, and ensuring that we're recovering those costs in the rate forecast as well. In addition to the capital and capital related expenditures, we also have the operating expenditure forecast, which includes things like salary costs, general operating and maintenance costs related to these services, and so on. And then finally, because the capital needs that we have in the forecast tend to be lumpy, meaning that we might see some years with relatively large infrastructure replacement and renewal needs, followed by years with relatively low infrastructure needs. We utilize the capital reserve as a bit of a stabilization mechanism, building in relatively constant annual contributions to those reserves from the operating budget, and then drawing on those reserves as needed to pay for capital needs in any particular year. Then once we bring that capital and operating forecast together with the customer and consumption forecast, we can calculate the rates that would be required to support sustainable provision of water and wastewater services. So that's a summary of the methodology. Then on slide 3, we're maybe now looking at the existing rate structure that's in place within the town. This has been in place for several years. So what we have on slide 3 is just a summary of the rates that are in effect for 2023. The town does impose a combined base fee, which is charged to each customer based on their meter size, based on the size of their connection on a bi-monthly basis. And then also includes a consumptive rate, which is what we refer to as an increase in block rate structure, which depending depending on the volume of consumption in a typical 2-month period, the customer pays progressively more per each cubic meter consumed. So currently, as you see at the bottom of slide 3, at the bottom part of that table, the amount of consumption that's allowed within that first block, which are about 95 cents per cubic meter for water, is about 220 cubic meters of consumption for the 2-month period. So that would allow someone about 1,320 cubic meters of consumption annually before they ever reach the second block. And then subsequently, we see the respective rates within block 2 and block 3. I'll come back to those numbers in a little bit. Just one other thing to also note here is that the monthly base charges are applied on a per unit basis. So for multi-residential dwellings, again, the charge per unit, not necessarily just per customer or per connection. And then if you can go to slide 4, please. So what we have done so far is quite a deep dive into to understand the current customer profile that's connected to the water and wastewater systems, and look at the consumption patterns very important associated with that customer base. And so what we see on slide 4 is a chart showing us how many customers, and this is focused on the residential customers, to look at the commercial sector next. So out of the residential customers that the town has, how many of them are consuming in different consumption blocks? So and you'll see that by general consumption band. What we see on the far right-hand side, as we've indicated with the little circle, is that there's a relatively small number of customers that would currently ever reach consumption levels that would put them into blocks 2 or 3. Or specifically about 5 customers on the residential side that would probably be paying block 2 rates, and only 1 customer typically that would be paying the block 3 rates. So a very small number that are ever making their way into those blocks. On the lower part of the slide, we see a chart showing the average consumption. This is the annual volume of water consumption per unit. This is something that we typically do as part of the rate studies to see where that level of consumption is currently sitting, how that compares to province-wide averages, and really informs what we expect those trends to be in the future. So as you see with that little chart on the bottom of slide 4 again, the average level of consumption for 2022, so for last year, was just under 180 cubic meters per residential unit. So this does align fairly well with broader provincial averages in that regard. What we also see is if we look at how that has evolved over the 5-year historical period, so going back to 2018, around the time when we did the last rate study. And what's interesting there, just on a side note, is that we see that average consumption level does decline a little bit between 2018 and 2019. We do expect there to be year-over-year fluctuations, weather patterns and things like that. But we have seen over the past decade and probably beyond a continued trend for that average consumption to go down, because as we get new appliances and houses and fixtures, all of them tend to be more water efficient. So we do see those average consumption levels decline because of that. And also just due to pricing, also the price of water goes up, the demand for water goes down corresponding to some. What you then will note, however, in 2020 is that average consumption level per residential unit popped up, and that's unexpected and something we've seen in terms of that little blip right across the province as a result of many people staying at home during the pandemic. So residential consumption went up as a result, but we are starting to see that trend down slightly since that time again. So next we will look on slide 5 at the non-residential consumption patterns. You'll see with the bar chart the number of customers by each consumption band is a lot more spread out because there is a lot more variability between individual commercial entities depending on the type of business operation that they're running. And so the consumption patterns are going to be very widely varied. What I would like to point out again, though, is if you look at the far right-hand side of the illustration, there are currently only 20 customers out of about 174 or thereabouts on the commercial side that are currently making their way to block 2. And a smaller number, still only about 6 that are making their way into block 3. So again, a very small number of customers, both on the residential and the commercial side, that are consuming at those higher block rates and paying those respective. If we can go to slide 6 then. So next we'll look at a overview of the 5 most common rate structures that we see across the province that are in use. So firstly, on slide 6, we have starting with flat rate. So this is where a municipality charges a fixed rate to the customer that's not related to the level of consumption at home. Effectively then, as that customer consumes more and more, their average cost per unit effectively goes down. So it's kind of counter to any effort to encourage water conservation or send appropriate price signals. However, there are still municipalities across the province that do utilize the flat rate approach, mostly if there isn't universal water metering in the municipality, so the municipality doesn't have the technology available to charge differently. The second rate structure then on slide 6 is what's referred to as a constant volumetric rate. So this entails a constant rate, just one rate for any level of consumption. That's again applied to every unit of consumption uniformly. And so therefore that unit cost remains the same at any volume of consumption, as we see in the top right of the slide. And then what I would like to highlight is that this constant volumetric rate, as well as all the subsequent ones that we will look at, is typically commonly associated with a base charge as well. So very similar to how the town charges for the services currently. But with the constant volumetric rate structure, as the volume of water used by a customer goes up, their total bill goes up in direct proportion to that. There's just one rate. Now, in contrast to that, if we switch to slide 7, we have 3 more rate structures here. Starting on the left-hand side of the slide, with the increasing block rate structure, which again is consistent with how the town currently charges for water and wastewater services. So within the set volume ranges within this rate structure, the charge per unit is set at 1 rate. And as we get to higher consumption blocks, the rate progressively gets higher. Typically, the first and second blocks are designed to cover residential volumes of consumption, with the subsequent blocks that normally set are used for heavier commercial and industrial uses. And that's what we see illustrated at the bottom with respect to the increasing block rate structures that the customer's bill will go up as consumption increases, but it will increase at a higher rate as the customer's consumption enters those higher blocks, and the consumption is purged out of the higher rate. So in contrast to that, we have the declining block rate structure, which is effectively the same as what I just described, but it goes the other way. So the rates charged for consumption in different blocks get progressively lower. So again, a customer's total bill would still increase as consumption goes up, but at a decreasing rate. So that is still the rate structure that's employed by some municipalities. And then on the far right hand side of the slide, we have what we call a humpback rate structure, which is really just a combination of the increasing block rates and a decrease in block rates, so that customers' bill goes up a little bit more steeply as they make their initial blocks, and then for really large volumes of consumption, typically the rate actually starts to go down. So those are the 5 most common rate structures employed across the province. If we turn to slide 8, in light of those, I wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of how many municipalities are using each rate structure. So this is based on quite a comprehensive survey that we put together. It's going back a few years, but the rate structures don't change very often typically. So it should still be a representative sample. So we looked at 208 municipalities across the province, out of which 133, so just over 2/3, employ the constant consumptive rate structure. So that is the single most common rate structure in the province. Next, about 21% of municipalities, so that's about 44 out of the 208 surveyed, utilize an increasing consumptive block rate structure. So again, that's similar to how the town charges for water wastewater services currently. And then followed by 8% of municipalities, so that's about 17 out of the 208 that employ a decreasing consumptive block rate structure, and then about 8%, or again about 17 out of the 208 municipalities that continue to employ flat rate charges for water wastewater services. We did also take a closer look at the municipalities that are in geographic proximity to the town, And what we see, trying to look at which of them employ a rate structure similar to the towns, so that increase in block rate structure. So when we look at Dufferin County, we see the town of Shelburne, Grand Valley, and Rono employ the increased block rate structure, and it was brought to my attention after we put the slide together that the town of Orangeville also employs an increase in block rate structure as well. So for subsequent comparisons as well. And then we would look a little bit further into Simcoe County. We see the city of Barrie, Devon, Bradford, West Gwillimbury, Oro-Medonte, and Springwater all employ increasing block rate structures as well. Then if we go to slide 9, I talked about how many municipalities employ each type of rate structure. So we're looking at more in this geographic proximity, looking at those municipalities that do employ a increased block rate structure. We wanted to look at how is that rate structure designed. So each municipality, or as you will see actually in the table on slide 9, there's quite a range in how municipalities interpret or impose this block rate structure. So we see some municipalities having the same block rate structure across all customers. We see municipalities like the city of Barrie, town of Bradford, West Gwillimbury, which actually have 2 different block rate structures depending on if it's for the residential or non-residential customers. And then just the sheer number of blocks also varies across municipalities. Something that did stand out as we looked at this comparison is that we have the town also indicated in the highlighted row at the very bottom. If you look at the most common consumption or amount of consumption allowed within that first block, is about 30 cubic meters. And this has all been converted to a bi-monthly equivalent because different municipalities have different cycles. So this is what it would convert to for a 2-month period. And so that 30 cubic meters for a 2-month period aligns very well with that 180 cubic meters of average residential customers that we know. Typically, that's how these tend to be designed, is to allow for the average customer to be generally consuming within that first block, but then to encourage water conservation, anyone that's consuming beyond that average, potentially making their way into the higher blocks. So it is that typical threshold is quite a bit lower than what we see within the town's rate structure currently, with the only one that's even remotely comparable being the town of Bradford, West Gwillimbury, which has 200 cubic meters of consumption within the first block, and only for their commercial use. So something in light of looking at those municipal practices and rate structure employed by different municipalities, we can go to slide 10. We wanted to propose looking at a couple of alternative rate structures for the town as part of the analysis that we will be undertaking and then presenting to council in a couple of months. And the 2 options that, and we will be assessing all of these against the current rate structure as well in all cases. But firstly, we wanted to look into potentially lowering the threshold of the existing blocks. So going from, again, for that first block, maybe about 220 cubic meters for a 2-month period, of reducing that to maybe be more in line with what we see other municipalities employing about 30 cubic meters of consumption for that 2-month period. So looking at that, lowering of the thresholds and what that would do, both in terms of how the revenues are generated and how that would impact, importantly, the types of customers that are connected to the system as well. The second option that we were looking into is to charge a constant consumptive rate that's still paired with a monthly or bi-monthly base charge, but just imposing a single rate for all consumption. This does provide for a simpler rate structure, as noted on the slide. It would really have minimal impact relative to how the town is charging currently, because there are so few customers that are actually making their way beyond the first block rates. So effectively, it almost is a constant rate for most customers. The only caveat is that it would somewhat reduce the incentives for water conservation relative to an increase in block rate structures. So something to deal with there. But again, those are, I think, options that we would like to propose considering and looking into, and we would prepare the analysis around those and present the standards to council at our next meeting. So then we should wrap up the presentation part on slide 11, a bit of a timeline for the next steps. So we are currently continuing to work with town staff as well as the town's engineering and planning consultants to develop a forecast of water and wastewater customers and the associated consumption patterns. So taking it from historical patterns, forecasting that out in light of the anticipated amount of growth within the town and any constraints around that. We are going to be building out the operating and capital expenditure forecast for that 10-year period, as well as an analysis of the financing options for those capital expenditures. And then we will be preparing the rate forecasts for the current rate structure, as well as the two alternative rate structures that we have proposed, and doing a detailed customer impact analysis for different type of customers, as well as a broader municipal comparison survey for your consideration. And then we're expecting to be back to present the results of the analysis and recommendations to council on September 25th. So that wraps up the formal part of the presentation, but we'll be happy to take any questions you might have or any feedback regarding the options that.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Peter? My initial thought, Peter, I mean, I'm definitely, I think, in favor of looking at lowering the threshold of existing blocks. You know, that block one that we have is, you know, yeah, I mean, it's pretty big. And then when you look in comparison to a lot of the other comparator communities, we're just not even close. So I think that definitely deserves some attention. I'm not yet sold on a move to the constant consumptive structure, but I'll reserve judgment until you're back with some numbers and we can see that. But I kind of like the at least in theory, the notion of the blocks, you know, to provide, you know, some progressive nature to it and also to try to incentivize conservation. So I guess a question for staff, how difficult would any change be in terms of implementation?
The software that we are currently using is capable of making any of the changes that Watson's are suggesting.
So it's not going to be a huge administrative nightmare if we start to tweak things. Okay. Okay.
What would be the financial impact to our community?
I guess that's what we'll find out in September.
Because
Exactly what we will be looking at next. It's now we're looking for theory of which rate structure we want to consider as alternatives, so we can build those into the model, and then just for comparison purposes, so we can present those more holistically to council.
Yes, well, we definitely don't want to charge you, you know, more than we need to, right? We understand the current needs of the community and the, you know, costs of everything going up. So the minimal amount that we would have to, you know, they would have to shoulder would be better.
I personally like to see it structured towards our capital cost of whatever we're doing, because we're going to have huge, like this is on the water side, the wastewater side to look at as well, and you have huge capital costs coming on the wastewater side. So if we reduce that large block number down and show costs on the capital side that makes sense for it being reduced into whatever increases we have to have going towards that, so that the public understands that that's what I'm looking for. Like right now, if I was a member of the public and looking at the graphs and everything that you presented, you have an idea of what you're talking about, I'd be lost.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got to make it simple enough in the end that the public does understand what you are presenting.
I think Denise has some thoughts to add.
I'm going to address Councillor Benato's second comment first through the mayor. So I think maybe what we can do is work with the firm, and similar to what we do with taxes, is use an average scenario of a consumer that has X number of people in their family. This is what their consumption is currently based on the cubic meters they use based on this block rate. If it was adjusted, so it's the average of 30 from the 220, which we currently have, what that would mean in terms of differential. Secondary to Councillor Benato's point about capital, as everybody knows, we have a delegation at AMO for the waste treatment plant expansion. One of the things that will also be something we would be expected to provide evidence of is own source revenue. and the structure that we have put in place to ensure that we are generating the capital to support our own infrastructure needs irrespective of the DC impacts. So as that, I think our delegation is on the 22nd in the morning. So certainly the water study will be, we reflect on and those comments, including what kind of capital we will be seeking in terms of debt financing or other sources in the absence of the estimated DC that we won't be having because of the changes from Bill 23.
That was going to be my next.
Councillor Guichardi?
Just a quick question. When you give us our breakdowns in September, will you be able to project on a number of different scenarios? So can we get, say, 30 cubic meters, 60, 90, 120, just to break down pricing impact that way?
Yes.
Because this is the 220 is, I mean, compared to the other municipalities, it looks like it's quite generous. And again, you know, the community might be able to stomach 3/4 of what's currently being charged, but not half. So if we get some kind of a breakdown as to you know, some different scenarios, but we can do, you know, apples to apples comparison.
Yes.
How it's going to affect the taxpayer. That'd be great. Thank you.
That's absolutely the plan, and I think it's gonna take what Sean is thinking, the CAOs, the way we look at that impact analysis is exactly how it was described, and we take, you know, 4 or 5 different types of customers. So it's a typical family, is looking at a single detached home, look at that typical volume of consumption, and then show what that annual bill impact is under the different rate structures. So it can be simplified down to that annual bill. And then similarly for maybe a single person household living in an apartment unit with much lower volume of consumption, and how they will be impacted by the different rate structures is going to be vastly different. And so we'll make sure that that's communicated, again, relative to those hypothetical customer types.
Sorry. I have one more thing, just again, to build on what Councillor Guichardi said. So what we would also look at is typical use. So for example, the county right now is exploring whether or not they would initiate some kind of rain barrel program. So we may find, because we're so generous on the 220 cubic meters, that it may not be an incentive for me to not use tap water for certain things, watering my flowers, other initiatives like washing my car, where if, for example, there was an alternative to the type of water you use for the same end use that doesn't cost you anything, that program might be appealing to you. So that's also where it's critical to understand behavior and use, because there may not be any impact financially if you adjust how you use the water.
All right, anything else for Peter? Okay, thank you, sir.
Excellent presentation.
We'll
Thank you.
see you back in September.
Yes.
All right, can I have a motion to receive presentation just for information at this point? Councillor Bernardo, second by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right, and our second presentation is from the Upper Grand District School Board to review the draft long-term accommodation plan. And we have Rashika Angrish and
Excuse me, Ralph Westbrook, I'm the chair of the board.
okay.
I want to thank you, Mayor Mills and councilors, for this opportunity to present to you. I'd also like to recognize longtime trustee, local trustee, and Topping who's here with us. We're always open to working together with our municipal partners for the benefit of our families and communities. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Executive Superintendent of Business Operations and Support Services, Glenn here, and Rashika Angrish, our Manager of Planning, to present the draft long-term accommodation. Thank you.
Just once again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Executive Superintendent of here. But in the interest of time, I'll hand it off to our manager, Rashika Angrish, who will give the presentation of our long-term accommodation plan. But once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present this information to the council.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ruchika Angrish. I'm manager of planning at the board. Again, on behalf of the board, thank you very much. There's a small presentation that is in front of you. We'll start with slide 2. Through this presentation, we'll provide a quick overview of long-term accommodation plan, what that process looks like, and we'll present some key pieces of this draft report specific to Shelburne and this area. On slide 3, talk about the purpose of the long-term accommodation plan. It is a strategic review of boards and facilities. This plan talks about population projections. We look at enrollment forecast that is based on the population projections. This long-term accommodation plan is an important step in ensuring that our school facilities are aligned with the needs of the board and the communities it serves. The goal of this LTAP, we love to use acronyms. So if I use LTAP, that is long-term accommodation plan, it is to produce a list of priority areas for the board to concentrate on short-term and long-term needs. It is also important to stress that LTAP is not a static document, and we continuously or annually review this report, and some of the recommendations may change. This plan is needed as changes to school facilities, such as identifying new sites or additions to the sites. It does take time to plan and execute. We're planning to bring a final report to trustees in the late fall for the approval of this long-term accommodation plan. Moving on to slide 4. Just giving a quick overview of the draft long-term accommodation plan report. It is a resource document for parents, guardians, partners, and stakeholders, and provides information about population and enrollment trends in each of our areas. It also talks about residential development, school utilizations, speaks about provincial and municipal policies, and the funding that impacts the board. There are several factors that impact the use of school facilities and accommodation planning. New home development through municipal and provincial mandates is one of the key ones. Provincial policy and regulation changes and demographic changes are just a few that we can continuously monitor. The recently announced changes by province, and the bills keep on changing, starting with Bill 23 and then 97. These are still being reviewed and analyzed by our staff and our department. And it's too preliminary to understand the impact of this bill and how the housing trends are going to change. So that makes it even more important for us to bring in annual long-term accommodation reports to see how the trend has changed with respect to housing, demographics, and such, and what school needs are needed. Moving on to slide 5. This slide basically gives an outline of the long-term accommodation report. I'll just briefly explain the various sections. There are 8 sections of the report. The first one talks about the purpose of long-term accommodation plan. It outlines the process and the communication strategy. Section 2 speaks about the guiding principles. Again, key information on provincial policies, boards, policies, and guidelines that again impact school enrollment and our accommodation strategies. Section 3 talks about various accommodation tools, such as boundary reviews, temporary accommodations, or permanent accommodations that school boards have to use to address overcrowding or underutilization in different schools, or making changes to different programs. Section 4 of the report will talk about different municipalities within our boundaries and the population growth and housing trends and the methodology that is involved in doing enrollment projections. Section 5 talks about the programs occupying school board space and their impact on accommodation planning. Leading into section 6, it gives us the explanation of all these policies, the enrollment trends based on all the analysis that have been completed in the previous sections, and how the projections look like for the next 4 to 8 years, and what areas are experiencing most growth and which will need accommodation needs in the short term and the long term for 4 to 8 years coming up. Section 6, section 7 will outline the work plan priorities. Basically, this section will identify what areas we will need either additions or school sites, kind of boundary reviews and such. So this section is still under works. There are a few priorities that have been listed, but the final report will be in the first. And finally, the last section talks about the definitions that are used throughout the report. So in case anyone of you are going through the report, that gives you an overview of how the report is structured. Slide 6 provides overview of the board, and as we can see on the map, the Upper Grand District School Board, it serves the County of Wellington, Dufferin County, and City of Guelph. We have 65 elementary schools and 11 secondary schools, serving about 36,000 students. On slide 7, we briefly talked about the population growth trends that we have experienced historically over the last couple of years in our jurisdiction. And as you can see, Dufferin County grew by 7.3%, by approximately 4,500 people within the time frame of 2016 to 2021. The report also highlights population trends by each municipality within the same time frame of 2016 to 2021. And within the counties, Shelburne was noted as one of the municipalities with the highest percentage population growth due to new residential development. Moving on to slide 8, the slide talks about the housing development forecast based on municipal official plans. So the report analyzes information from the counties and the local municipalities official plans. We review your MCR reports looking at the population trend, and that's how we make these projections in for accommodation for our students. And as the report notes, Dufferin County is going to experience significant growth by the year 2051. And in Dufferin, no surprise, Orangeville, Grand Valley, and Shelburne are noted to see the highest increase in population currently. So we use all that information along with the birth data, the current enrollment in each of the schools and how those trends are changing. We look at residential development applications that are circulated to us by various municipalities and the planning staff. And we input a variety of number of factors to provide that projection for our board. Moving on to slide 9, this slide highlights the schools in Dufferin County, and highlighted in yellow are the schools in Shelburne area. As I noted earlier, the long-term accommodation plan gives us projection for the next year projection, the 4-year and the 8-year projection that tells us where growth is expected and what areas we need to concentrate on or closely monitor when looking for accommodation needs in near and far future. There are generally elementary schools in the northern portion of Dufferin County, including Shelburne and Grand Valley. They attend Center Duffin, District High School.
And as a no surprise, there's many new residential developments that are noted in Shelburne. We are noticing that enrollment growth will continue to rise in Centennial Highlands, Ivy Heights, and Center Dauphin due to these housing projections. And we'll basically continue to monitor how with this evolving planning policy as well.
On the last slide, we are requesting to our municipal partners
That if
you can review the draft long-term accommodation report as it relates to
your sections and your areas thoroughly. We
continue to work with your staff on various municipal applications that are
circulated to us, and we continue to
look forward to review any comments or questions that you have as you thoroughly review our draft report. In the next phase, in the next coming months, we will be working on preparing a work plan, as I mentioned in the presentation earlier, and noting where the significant growth is expected, and looking at
the accommodation needs for 5 to 10 years.
we have to start early. We project now to secure a school site with subdivision applications and get ministry approvals and such.
It takes a very long time. So that's why looking at your population numbers, your official plan, MCR, those are very important and critical for us.
And finally, we'll present our final report in the late fall. So we look forward to any of the feedback that you have. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Questions for Chica? Councillor Gashardi.
More than a question. Having been at the school, when enrollment was over 900 in past years, this is, I mean, students are shoulder to shoulder back then. And you're looking at 25, 26, up around the same numbers again. The concern is, I mean, that's pretty much capacity for that building. I spent 22 years in that building. I can tell you right now that anything over 850, 900 is uncomfortable for kids. They're walking down the hall shoulder, which is concerning. Is there a plan?
This is the plan. This is why we are doing, short-term and long-term accommodation. So for short-term, when we look at, okay, what is the next year's enrollment projection? And immediately next year, you can't, there are many ministry approvals that are needed to do any kind of additions and things like those. So for a short term, it gets into how are we going to accommodate students for next. And then in the long term, when we look at the adopting in 8 years, we're looking at the numbers are increasing over 1,100. So how are we doing that accommodation? That is part of this process. We highlight this information now so that we can start working on it over next coming years before we reach that capacity and have a plan in place.
Councillor Bernardo. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I would say the school's at capacity now.
Yeah,
Comfortably at capacity.
exactly.
And,
So I was gonna say.
yeah, I've been building with it's been shoulder to shoulder, and that was around 900 students. So it's
There's no,
concerning from,
there's no more room for more portables either, so.
yeah. no, it's real estate.
Yeah. Are you gonna stack them on top of each other?
Portables are.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
Councillor Bernardo.
I'm looking at Primrose. And it's a disaster. I can honestly say that.
No,
And
that's-
long-term planning doesn't seem to really work when you start stacking a huge amount of students into a school that was never designed for that amount of students. My concern is, it's great, I know you need provincial approvals, I know you need to do long-term planning, but it seems like you're way behind the curve. Trying to get to that point, and we are a rapid growing community, and 2051. That's gonna happen a lot shorter term than 2051. And that's where I'm pretty concerned about.
Through you, Mayor, thank you for your question. Primrose is the classic example of the impact of COVID. We did not expect any kind of housing trend changes until the COVID trend, changed completely. And for Primrose, we have initiated a boundary review. The report was presented to the trustees to initiate a boundary review, so there will be more information that will be presented in early fall. And we're looking for accommodation needs for next year.
You're shipping them somewhere else at that point in time. That's what
Not in your shower.
saying, but the boundary could be such. Follow up on Councillor Shardy. This council in the last term has had a lot of complaints come to it that were not council related complaints due to the crowding at the high school. They were board complaints, but we ended up getting them because we had to deal with them. So I, again, have the same concern as Councilor Shardy, because I hate to deal with complaints that I have no control over at all because of the situation, especially at the high school. When it's crowded, things erupt, problems start existing, parents then turn around and who do they blame? Us, and we have no control over it.
I'm going to assume, just by looking at this, the green, blue, and red are symbolic of the level of urgency on this. Is that a correct assumption? Because there's no key on this page, just a.
Sorry, through the Mayor. The light blue represents it's underutilized. So the OTG means the on-the-ground capacity of the school, which is a defined term by the ministry, is, for example, for Highland Heights is 510. The green represents it's just above the OTG, which is still in the green zone, and the red represents that's the danger zone. That's when we need to start looking into what are we doing for the short term or the long term.
I share the concerns, particularly with respect to the high school. And one of the things that I'm looking at here, when you look at the growth forecasted for Grand Valley and District Public School, I mean, that is dramatic. I mean, not quite a doubling, but close to a doubling by 2030. And Grand Valley is still a feeder school to Center Dufferin. So is that a potential boundary adjustment that we're looking at?
It's too preliminary to talk about what boundary adjustments are we looking at for Primrose, because that's the analysis that our staff is doing now.
Not for Primrose, sorry, for Grand Valley.
I'm sorry.
So Grand Valley feeds into Center Dufferin District High School. And what I'm asking is, perhaps it's time that we look at a boundary adjustment so that the students from Grand Valley and District Public School go to a different high school.
Yeah.
Create a high school in Grand Valley.
That's a good point. As part of when we initiate boundary reviews for a particular school, only then we are able to assess their boundaries and look at the feeder schools. At this time, Grand Valley is not on our radar to do any kind of boundary review. You can see that even for the 3-year mark, it is still in the green zone, on the paper zone. But at the 8-year mark, we see a huge change in the school. So it gives us some time to strategize how do we accommodate that long term. Whether there are new sites that are identified in the new growing areas, because that is one of the things that we will identify in our long-term accommodation plan as well as our annual plans. So whether there are new sites and how they will be this high school, so all those things that become part of this report. I think
a little too preliminary to speak about Grand Valley for me.
Okay, for what it's worth, I would suggest that that might be something that the board look at seriously. I mean, not only in terms of forecasted pupil numbers, but also just in terms of geographic concerns. I mean, it's an awfully long way to be busing students from Grand Valley to Shelburne. I know traditionally it's been the case because there are limited options for secondary schools, but in my humble opinion, that's one area where I think the board should be looking at a boundary adjustment in terms of the feeders into Center Dufferin. Councillor Fegan and then Councillor Sample.
Last term, this council of Jay had the board come to our table as we raised concerns about the overcrowding in Center Dufferin District High School. And at that point, we asked the board, at what point do you consider building a new high school? I put it to you again. What are we looking at? When is the school board going to look at building another high school? Because looking at these numbers, I mean, there's an awful lot of red on this page in a very short time. Like you said, it takes a long time to go through all the red tape, bureaucracy, and everything else that you have to go through before you can get approvals for these schools. And then there's all kinds of other red tape in order to make these things happen. When do you start looking at building a new high school for this entire area? Because right now, you are very crowded. And it's going to get worse based on this chart.
To you, Mr. Mayor. Typically, when we apply for, we have to apply to the ministry for even saying we need a new high school.
Sure.
And a typical thing is we have enough students sitting in portable that can be shifted into. So that gives you a general sense of how long it takes to get to that literary standpoint to say we need a new high school. The other option is looking at the growth. If the growth numbers that are projected in the municipal official plans and the county's official plan that trigger that by in the next 8-year term, we would surpass 800 to 900 students in the school. That will trigger us to put it in this long-term accommodation plan that we would need to look at a new high school site. So that's how the planning for schools goes both for elementary as well as for secondary. When they're looking at these numbers and say, okay, even though it's in red, if the numbers are doubled, you need minimum 300 to 400 students sitting in 4 rows for an elementary school. Only then we get funding from the ministry. Unfortunately.
You've got 240 sitting in portables now. Sorry, according to your numbers, you got approximately 240 students sitting in portables now at Center Dufferin. With 5 portables, I'm just averaging 30 class size of 30, right? This class size is 27. It doesn't take into consideration shared facilities like phys ed classes, like specialty classes, without expansion. And that high school in Shelburne has already gone through one expansion in 78. So I'm just concerned about, how many more, you said, to your words, you said traditionally, when there are enough portable kids in portables to facilitate a new school, then they will look at building a new school. And just with respect, I put to both of you, okay, there is not an awful lot of real estate for more portables in Shelburne. And because we are a feeder school of many communities, like I said, I've been there, can speak from experience. That this is, you're not going to get into high school building in 4 years. You got approval today, right? Because that's what the 10. So we're in trouble now, according to your 3-year numbers. And I don't think adding an extra portable is going to facilitate enough of a relief for crowding capacity over a 3-year period. So do you envision us having a new school in 8 years? I mean, I can't. according to
I just think your numbers say that you need to ask for approval now. Right? Not in
Okay,
5 years.
let's,
from now.
let's let Glenn
Certainly,
answer.
I think there's a couple components there as far as for the items and you identified items. It's the ask, and there's a couple different options there when it comes to expansion. There is a brand new school, and I think the 900 is that, I talk about that, or there is the additions is another option as well. As far as, again, it gets into the actual, site itself and what does it look like, permanent space and so forth, on what each of the expansions. Or there's, and again, we start going to the toolkit, or it's bound review, or what does that look like as far as items? You describe as far as when it comes to the feeder schools, what does that bring? So that's, those are the various components. And it's not just up to the school board, because it's also, as mentioned, is you request as far as for the business case, the capitals, and it's the competing against what are the rest of the province and requirements for that. So it isn't just the, yes, you have a case, but it's also in that comparison to the other areas as well. So these are, so that's been part of the process. But we are definitely, and this is the benefit of working with and continuing to connect with staff, so forth, is how the numbers progressing and not only for the growth that we see and our projected growth and the ever changing what we potentially see as well. So definitely this is something that we're mindful of and acknowledge as far as the ongoing items. Hence, we bring the long term as far as what we're identifying, and then for specific areas such as identified when it comes to Primrose, the next process is the boundary, which is very specific as far as location. So it's something that, again, we're identifying as far as the areas where we need to take a look at, but we're definitely hearing as far as you describe when it comes to capacity of concern. And again, we have from the board and also through that.
trustee Topping can also attest to it with the grouting and et cetera. I'm sorry, I would think you would be able to attest to the capacity issues that Senator Dufferin over the years in terms of numbers of students. It does go up and down, yeah, but when it goes up, it's like everybody's walking down the hall.
All right, Councillor Sample's been waiting patiently, and Deputy Mayor Hall, I know you're passionate about this.
Just an observation is that it just seems that the school board just seems to be behind all the time when it comes to all this stuff. I'm not saying it's your fault or anything like that, but it just seems that you guys just need to be ahead of the game a little bit more. You're seeing your 8-year projections, but not willing to do anything on an 8-year projection yet, because, and your words there alone say that it doesn't hit your radar yet. Well, and everybody heard you say it, and you said it too, is that it takes very long to build a school. So I know when Glenbrook went into this area for that public school, it was a very, very long time waiting for that to happen. And it did finally relieve a lot of stuff. So, the high school, my kids are both in high school. One just graduated, and the other one's not graduated yet. They come home every day complaining about there's no room, there's nowhere to go. They're sharing lockers. They can't get into the activities they need to get into. So they're just not. I don't think you're looking at the kids' perspective of this whole thing. The kids' growth in this and their education is the number one factor in this. That's what has to be attended to. And if you're overcrowded, it just doesn't happen. And I know that for a fact. My kids went up and down, and I had to put them in summer school, and I had to do after-hour classes. And I got a boy in summer school right now because there was issues at the high school. So I grant you that I understand that, but something needs to be addressed now, not 5 years from now, and all of a sudden you get the radar, and then it's 8 years after that to get a school built. Something that should be getting now. Just my comment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Hall.
I guess my question actually starts back at page 8. Page 8, you show the overall Dufferin County housing growth change of just over 10,000. So I'm assuming, or I'm hoping that you're assuming, or I'm assuming that that's just the housing itself versus the actual population growth that they're looking and projecting, because it's more in the tune of just under 27,000 people. And when we took that or take that into consideration for the town of Shelburne, of that almost 27,000, 5,700 are related to our community. Compared to Orangeville, where there's 7,400. Now, when you go back to page 9, the question becomes, you know, you're showing growth in Orangeville, but you're showing contraction in the high schools. The high school is actually reducing overall headcount. You're going from currently just around 1,823 down to 1,780. And actually Orangeville district secondary school is underutilized versus our overutilization here, which again points back to the mayor's overall review of what are you doing with some of these feeder schools, because that's our problem. And you've got an underutilized asset that sits in Orangeville. Now, whether that mates, because I don't see how you have a growth in Orangeville yet, contraction in high school. We don't see the public schools here to get the fuller picture, but something just doesn't seem to add up properly with the overall headcounts.
And that could be a quicker fix, to be honest, you know, looking at the boundaries. As opposed to building a new school.
Yeah, and as described, thank you, sorry, Mayor. In regards to the toolkit as I described from that, these are all the various options. There's, you know, the immediate one is when you have capacity, you start affordable. Again, you're not disrupting families in the school. Get the boundary review, as we all know, is also disruptive. Things are changing as far as items in there. So you want to be careful, you want to be mindful. What does that look like? So it's very much, you know, the process intensive. It's I'll let them process as well for that. I'm mindful that definitely but it is an option as far as what does that look like, because when you do go to and present this case, one of the things that also is presented is what's the available capacity in the surrounding area and what's that look like. So definitely that is something that's both required and items that does factor in as far as what's happening in all the rest of the schools in the various areas as well. So we're providing you, you know, the full report provides all of the different areas and so forth. But we wanted to focus for tonight in the time frame that we had also very much in the focus areas and so forth. But we really appreciate feedback and the information, both from the, you know, the concerns of what you're hearing as well, but also as far as ongoing. We know that this is the housing items, but we're also seeing, you know, changes as far as demographics and what does that look like and the intensity and so forth. And that change is probably going to be more. So I think this is something where the ongoing conversations between municipalities and school boards will be increasingly more important as far as what are we seeing, how has this happened, because what we've been able to model in the past is going to be changing as far as what's that look like. So again, this is the ongoing relationship between the school boards and municipalities as we continue to work together for how we know how the students will hear from us.
Glenn, just one more question. And I honestly don't know. Have new high schools been built in Wellington County in the last, say, 5-6 years?
No, we've got we are working towards a new secondary school in South Bow.
Okay.
But there hasn't been another secondary school for a while.
So Center Wellington, Fergus, when was that school built?
I don't have the year for me. I've been with the board for 7 years.
Okay.
So it predates me.
That would have been the most recent new high school, I guess, in Wellington.
Yes, as far as our new high school.
Okay.
Also Wellington Heights, I believe might would have been one as well as far as time frame. But again, it predates me as far as the exact date, but we can take a look at that and provide that as a follow up, the exact date. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think what I'm getting at, I mean, there's been a long standing feeling, I think, right or wrong, that, you know, Wellington tends to, you know, perhaps be favored, you know, slightly. I'll just say it for what it is. You know, and you know, quite frankly, West Side Secondary School, which I think is probably the newest secondary school in Dufferin County, was built when I was still in high school. You know, and when you look at population growth trends, Wellington and Dufferin are, you know, pretty much on par. Dufferin actually has a slight edge over the last few years. So I think my point is that there's a growing frustration, which I think you've probably, gathered. I think Dufferin and in particular, this area needs to feel some love and needs to feel as though the board is listening. To Councillor Benato's point, I'll certainly, second that. I think those of us around this table are growing a little tired of fielding complaints and concerns from residents about school matters over which we have no control. So perhaps, if nothing else, maybe some more public communication, some public engagement. Perhaps the board needs to hear these concerns firsthand, because there are significant concerns in the community. So if nothing else, I hope that message was conveyed tonight. And we'll certainly stay tuned to see how this plan develops. But these are growing communities and a lot of pressures and stressors that come with that. And the longer that the longer we go without action to address that, I think the more problems we're asking for. So, okay. Any final questions or comments?
Appreciate you coming.
Absolutely.
And taking the brunt of our frustration.
I understand a few of us went to the high school before it was renovated in 76. That are sitting around, there's at least two of us.
You graduated in 76.
No, I graduated in 79, whatever.
Well, I hate to inform you, but I graduated that high school when we had 300 students. That was in 1972.
Was it one room?
It was a good old country school before we built.
Oh. Thank you very much. And I think, that the other important part is just having this ongoing open dialogue, with staff as well, to make sure that the numbers that we're experiencing and that we're expecting are properly factored into any plans. So thanks so much for your time, and look forward to seeing this develop.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can I have a motion then to receive that presentation for information? Councillor Sample, seconded by Councillor Gushardi. All in favor? That's carried. All right, and then we do have a proclamation for this evening as well for Emancipation Day, whereas August 1st, 1834 was the date that slavery was abolished throughout the British colonies by King William IV, pursuant to the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. And whereas within 15 years of the abolition of slavery, between 35,000 and 40,000 Black settlers made their way to Ontario, in large part by way of the Underground Railroad into southwestern Ontario. Now, therefore, as an expression of our respect for human liberty and freedom, and in recognition of the richness of the culture and history brought to Ontario by African Canadians, I, Mayor Wade Mill, on behalf of council, do hereby proclaim August 1st, 2023 as Emancipation Day in the town of Shelburne. Are there any council inquiries for tonight? Councillor Sample.
Just a question. I had some communications with staff about the sidewalk at the high school. About the curb, you can't access it with a stroller, be fixed for the new year. Maybe.
Let Jim take.
Thank you.
Jim?
Through your worship, yes, we are looking into that with a contractor. There is a step level there between the curb, so it's not just as simple as cutting a curb out. We do have to match the sidewalks to the fire too, but we do have our contractor looking at that.
Okay.
Gives a quote on it immediately. We're going to get that out of the way instead of waiting for our RFP for sidewalk replacements and that. So
Okay.
we do have that.
Thank you.
Jim, while you're up there, I'll ask just if you could give a bit of a status update on Briggins Field.
Yeah,
Yes, through your worship. Realized I was off last week, but there was an issue there with the field. It was very wet, so it's closed down, fenced off. I believe there was a group that used it as well in the meantime, but that area was once part of the sewage treatment plant, the storm lagoons, and it was built in a number of years ago. The material that was brought in. That material is quite a bit heavier than Thunderfield. Thunderfield's kind of sandy. Deals with moisture a lot better, so. We have had quite a bit of rain recently. It did seem to improve today, from what I understand from staff, so we're looking at it. And they were checking the irrigation system again, because there was some complaint that came in there that the irrigation was still going off during rain periods, which it shouldn't be now. We did have an issue there 2 weeks ago where the irrigation system was completely at lunch. It was going off in the middle of the day. It's supposed to be between 3 and 5 a.m. that it was going off, and it was going off multiple times. So staff did try to reprogram that, didn't work. So we had a contractor come in, and sure enough, the circuit board that controls it was fried from what they figured was a recent lightning strike to it. So we do have that fixed up as well. There is a rain gauge on that too. So if it does rain, that's supposed to cancel the program. So we're gonna have that looked at too. But yeah, that issue should be under control now. So it was drying up as long as we don't have too much more.
Yeah, this week's forecast doesn't look all that helpful, but the reason or part of the reason I asked, I was there last Wednesday and it was quite wet, and some of the comments I heard, I'm hoping we can maybe test tonight. I think there was some speculation that perhaps some of the water from the lagoons was somehow backing into the field. I'm assuming that's not the case.
No, that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
That was abandoned some years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact time frame that was filled in, but it was, I believe, about 15 years ago. So that those structures were physically removed in there, so that shouldn't be the case. It does have an odor to it, but it seems to be that standing water kind of grass growing.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Anybody else? All right, perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay, so on to regular reports. So our first report is our CAO's report regarding the additional themed crosswalks.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Mills. So I had mentioned at a previous report when we were talking about the Pride crosswalk, and council approved it that night, that we may, due to the deterioration of the location where the Every Child Matters crosswalk had been installed in 2022, need to move it. We thought we wouldn't move it, we would reinstate it there, but unfortunately, as council may be aware, we just completed the boreholes with respect to the water main break from April. And we anticipate that if any work needs to be done on William, it just doesn't make any strategic sense to repaint it at that location for 2023. So as these locations are something we need council to approve. The report has outlined that in an interim basis for 2023, we would suggest that it be placed at the intersection of Main and James on the north side. The reason being is that side is part of the existing walk for the Every Child Matters celebration Orange Shirt Day on September 30th. And then in 2024, we would anticipate just moving it back for the existing location at William and Main. We had identified too in the prior report that through the DEI committee, staff outlined the plan that potentially a program of up to 10 crosswalks is something that we could institute in Shelburne, not only as an educational opportunity, but to celebrate and share legacy of the town. And that we said we would bring back any potential theme to you for approval, and then also work with any affected or key stakeholders. So the one that we're recommending with council's approval would be that for early fall 2023, we look at an addition at the William and First area, and be on the going north south side to connect sidewalks across the street from the Legion, and where the former post office, well, still is there, but the parcel component of the post office is there, and then we would have a Lest We Forget theme. We would need to look at designs based on other municipalities. We certainly understand immediately that The painting of poppies, because we know that's a common suggestion, is not respectful. And it is not something we would entertain so that people are walking on poppies. We're considering just having the words "lest we forget" in a nice script that is also AODA responsible. And we would certainly come up with that in-house to save any design costs. And convey that in terms of sharing it with the Legion to just make sure they're comfortable with that. So to be in place well in time for Remembrance Day and the services that we have. This year, there could be, for example, even though I didn't write it in the report, there could be some component of the ceremony that also incorporates a blessing of the sidewalk as a function of that walk from the Legion to Town Hall and back. So really, that's the heart of the report. It's estimated as the financial side of it says that's going to be anywhere between $500 and $600 for the paint. And there'd be no design costs. We do it in-house. The unfortunate reality is that we've come to recognize, and while many communities are doing this and spending a significant amount more than we are for the paint, which is a water-based paint, we have to recognize that we're probably going to need to do every sidewalk every year as part of the budget. So we as staff recognize that cost, but we also recognize that as part of council's strategic or council's priorities, that recognizing and celebrating the diversity of our community and our heritage and our uniqueness and our authenticity is something that you also have directed us to always undertake. This is a key component, we believe, of doing that. And while it certainly is taxpayers' dollars, we believe it's an effective use to bring education and awareness and make the community who walks our community also have an experience firsthand. So that sort of be defending the modest budget for the program, but we also see that it's an investment also in arts, culture, and heritage.
Okay. Any questions for Denise? Councillor Sample?
Just with the crosswalk for lest we forget crosswalk, we engaged anybody like Legionnaires or anything Legion on the ideas of this?
Through the mayor. So no, we haven't yet, but the report outlines that when we come up with a draft design, that would be provided to the Legion for their comments and consultation. And as I mentioned too, we certainly wouldn't even entertain looking at painting poppies, knowing that another community did that. And the immediate response was that is a very disrespectful approach.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wagner?
Just a quick comment to maybe have for the future. I've had a couple of not really complaints, but concerns brought to me with regards to the Pride crosswalk due to its location and highly trafficked area. It's deteriorating very, very quickly. So maybe perhaps we reassess about putting a crosswalk there at all, just because it is so well traveled. And we just come up with a new location next year for the Pride.
Thank you, Councillor Wagner. I did actually in the report, just above the financial section, actually sort of address that particular type of concern, where certain streets, we know the volume may experience more wear and tear, and that it may require us to look at only recommending alternative locations with less traffic. And that certainly would hopefully minimize or at least reduce the deterioration because of the amount of traffic. What it won't impact, there's an intentional damage to any of those locations, unfortunately. And we've painted the Pride twice now. And I can convey, unless council directs us otherwise and wishes to spend more money, it wasn't our intention to repaint it again in 2023, but certainly to your point, we're already looking at on a list of 10 locations that we had across the town, if there's an alternative location for this particular one as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we need a motion to receive the report and to approve the interim location for the Every Child Matters crosswalk at Main and James, and to approve the location for the Lest We Forget crosswalk at William and First. Third sector for that. Councillor Gachardi, second by Councillor Sample. All in favor? It's carried. All right, next report is from our treasurer regarding some changes to our grant funding allocation policy application. Barry?
Mayor. Council's familiar with the annual grant process. Started in 2016 and it has had several changes to it through the course of the last several years. Including allowing grant applicants to make a public presentation to council. And with the addition of a grant funding committee that we launched just this year. So staff reviewed the policy and we've left the purpose and program intent to be the same. We have changed some of the funding eligibility and the information that we ask of the applicants. And that includes personal information where first page of the actual grant application will not be distributed to the public. Because it contains personal information, but the remainder of the application will be included in the council agenda package. And that is something new that we haven't done. And it allows for us to be more transparent and accountable to the public. The process has also incorporated council priorities. We've also included the additional wording from council's 2019 motion with respect to dignity and inclusion and non-goods and others. So attached as appendices, there's the actual policy itself, and all of the changes have been highlighted in yellow. So I won't go through them all, but I did want to point out a couple of important ones that we've come across in the last 5 years. That being one where a project or an event may not already be financially supported by one of the town's committees or boards. So in that respect, you can't come to council and ask for grant funding and then also go to committee of the we've also asked that at least one of council's strategic priorities must be met with respect to the application. We've also included that town reserves the right to deny funding for any application that is not held within the town of Shelburne, and that projects must primarily benefit town of Shelburne residents. We've limited the funding request at 15,000, and then we've also identified that any application for $5,000 may be required to provide additional information. Left it that it can be council or committee of council, because if there was ever a year that decided that we didn't need a committee, then it would still fall into council's role. Council is still ultimately responsible because the committee brings the recommendation back. The application is also attached, and the only change that I noticed that I need to make on that, since it was distributed, is on page 5, where I've got the estimated percentages of populations that participate in the event. I'm going to change the percentages so that they're not overlapping one another. So it'll be 0 to 24%, and then the next one will be 25 to 49. An example. And other than that, if there should be questions, this is what staff is proposing to initiate for this year's, sorry, it will be for the 2024 process, but starts next month.
All right, thank you. Questions for Carrie, Councilor Bernardo?
I went through it all and having been on the committee going through the process on selecting for the grant. I really appreciate all the changes that were made. It makes it a lot easier for any committee that has to go through that selection process and gives us the information and the tools that we need to make the proper recommendations along with staff to all the council. So I really appreciate all those changes, and it will stop some of the issues we had to go through this year.
I think that's the idea, right? Policies developed through experience. So, yeah. Councilor Wagner.
Yes, thanks so much. I kind of reviewed everything as well, and it seems to be very fair and, you know, it brings up some of the issues that we have dealt with in the past. The only thing I was a little bit on the fence about was the addition here, if funding or staff resources are provided to a community organization, the town reserves the right to participate in the planning of the event and or the review of the final plans and provide comments before the commencement of the scheduled event. So for me, I understand that we're, you know, within the grant process, we are using taxpayers, you know, money to potentially give to an organization or an event. However, with everything else that's listed in here, I would assume that if the funds are being delegated, they've met all those requirements as to, you know, the values and the morals of the town and council's, you know, strategic priorities or whatnot. So I'm a little, you know, sort of torn with sort of saying the town has rights to participate in, you know, an organization, you know, with their event. Partly only because, you know, sort of taking that control away from the organization, and secondly, adding more work to town staff, right? And where they wouldn't necessarily need to be reviewing stuff, they wouldn't need to take time away from you know, other jobs in order to facilitate, you know, overseeing an event or an organization. So, you know, I would feel that if that organization isn't appearing, you know, to abide by the rules that are already suggested and required, that they just wouldn't receive the funding. So that's the only part that I don't know how else to say it.
I'll take this one. So
I'll just say, so that section was in the original policy from 2016. That's not been added.
Okay, it's in yellow. That's why I figured it was a new addition.
no.
Yeah, on
So
mine it's yellow.
Carrie, what she's referring to is the formal incorporation of council's direction with respect to their ability with regards to oversight. So that's what wasn't, so what it was something we communicated, but it wasn't formally in the policy. So this was a direction of council, I believe, from 2019 or 18. It's literally that the town reserves that right. And I can't remember which meeting it was, but that was.
I think it was 2019.
2019. So you commented that in what we've been doing today is in the application process and the promotional material on the website, we have been saying that this clause, as per council motion and requirement last term, is formally something you must comply with. They actually have to sign a form to say they will comply with that. And that came out of the Racism Task Force initiative as well. So what happens here is that formality, the direction and the requirement that council provided direction to staff regarding has now been incorporated into this document. That's where it came from. It was council's direction to staff. If you do not want that, then staff requires a formal direction that you don't want that requirement as per your former direction, former term, to be in place. So it's not that we initiated this and involved it. We are respecting the direction of council.
Yes, I was wrong.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
And that is right out of the motion from 2019.
Okay. Yeah, well.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that, I mean, since 2019, I can't think of an instance where the town has invoked that power. But I think, you know, the initial intention was to sort of have a bit of a safety net there so that, you know, even though some organization presents plans, you know, if as we get closer to the event, we find out that, you know, we're providing funding for something that is going to be completely off base from the values that, you know, we're trying to promote, then we have some recourse to step in and say, wait a minute, you know,
Yeah.
we're not providing taxpayers funding for something that, you know, it is such a public affront to the value that we're trying to promote.
Yeah, no, and I see that in here already, right? I mean, it literally does say that the town has the rights to revoke any kind of,
Yeah.
you know, funding. So I guess it's just being a little bit more formal, I don't know, but to me, it just reads as if the town will, you know, I don't know, they have this power to shut you down, you know what I mean? Where it already does say that in here to, you know, that your funding will be revoked. They'll, you know, adhere to the requirements, right? So I don't know, I just didn't really, it just didn't sit well with me, I guess, in that aspect of, you know, when an organization is working really hard to create an event and there's this, you know, shadow over top of it to be like, well, the town can like, you know, shut you down, right? Like,
Yeah.
so.
Which, you know, as I say, in the, you know, number of years since that has been a directive, not part of the formal policy, it's never actually been used.
Yeah.
But,
I'll just speak to it process wise. Unless you make a formal direction and motion and direct us to not have that terminology as a requirement of the grant process, it is a requirement. So what we've done is simply formalize the direction in the updated policy. It is in place currently as per the direction of the former council. So it's not new. It's simply a formalization of a requirement that, and again, we can't deviate from that as staff in the absence of council directing us to change the approach.
So Lindsay, it grew out of a fair incident, you remember?
Mhm.
Okay, and that same incident can happen in any event that gets grant funding, that's why it's there. It's there to protect us as well.
Mhm.
So I don't have an issue with it, I think it's there for a reason. If we have to use it, we can. We've never had to use it, we hope we never will have to use it, but it's there. It's just for our protection.
Cool.
Okay.
I just, like I said, there were other things that I didn't hear already to that degree, and I just was thinking it was maybe a little bit of an overkill, but fine.
all right, any other thoughts? No? Okay, so we need a motion to receive the report, to provide for the bylaw which rescinds bylaw number 05-2016, as well as direction to adopt the new policy and the application form as presented. So Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? Carried. All right, carries up again with our Q2 financial report.
The regular quarterly report that you're all used to. I have attached as appendix 4 the draft budget schedule for 2024 and highlighted some important meetings that will be taking place prior to council actually seeing the budget. And that is the water and wastewater study, as well as the final Parks and Recreation master plan. So we've also set up the special meeting to hear the grant funding process from the applicants, and maybe it's a little bit of an aggressive timetable, but we can budget adopted by December again. And back to the financial report. The motion does recommend that we award a contract for asbestos assessment to indoor environmental specialists. This comes as a result of changes that have been made recently to the public sector accounting standards. And part of that is asset retirement obligations. And for that, we have to have all of our buildings assessed for asbestos. Not in order to remediate them if there is asbestos found, but to set it up on the books as a liability. So it's strictly an accounting procedure that we're being required to do with municipalities in Ontario. And we appreciate that a lot of municipalities are looking for this type of work. So we've been lucky to secure 2 quotes, and the indoor environmental specialist coming across $21,038. This was not budgeted for, and I'm proposing that we take it from the accounting audit line in the general administration budget. Because at this point, we don't know which buildings may have asbestos, so to charge it by department doesn't make sense at this point. Any liability that's set up on books, if at some point in time, we may have to remediate necessary whatever's found. But that's where I'm proposing to charge it to at this point.
Any questions, Councilor Shardy?
Sorry, but an interim charge and we'll then charge whatever, we then transfer that to, let's say, specific area, it should say. There'd be something in public works, should be something. And how
I think
specific, are we just gonna leave it at
At
that?
this point, it would just stay in administration. It's a one-time cost just to get the report that we need to give to the auditors so they can. We've already taken care of some of those other items that we've had landfill post-closure liability on the books for years now. We don't have any fuel tanks and we will be retiring any sewage treatment plants. We're just upgrading them.
All right, anything else, Carrie? Okay, can I have a motion then to receive the financial report, adopt the 2024 budget schedule, and award the contract for asbestos assessment to Indoor Environmental Specialists, Inc. at a cost of $21,438.20 CHST. Councillor Sample, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hall. All in favor? Carried. All right, any notices of motion? Councillor Bernardo.
For a notice of motion. I don't have an exact copy of it. Typically,
I'll read it out here. Get it. Right, be it resolved that council asks staff to show how staff can be accommodated in the upper floor of the former police side of town hall, and to bring back a report to council as to what is required to turn the lower part into a council chamber, and further to bring back as part of the report cost to allow it to be incorporated into the 2024 budget. Okay, so we'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting and we can debate that then. Any other notices? No, okay. All right, communications. Anything there? No. Okay, can I have a motion to receive those items then for information? Councillor Sample, seconded by Councillor Gashardi. All in favor? Carried. All right, and a motion for confirming bylaw. Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? Carried. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor?